Hi, everybody. I want to talk to you today about the Toulmin model of argumentation. It is a way for you to make sure that you are writing complete arguments that are compelling and that will get you what you want when you make an argument. So, what is the Toulmin model? So, this guy, Stephen Toulmin, he came up with a model of argumentation, basically a pattern that we can all follow to figure out or to make sure that our arguments are complete and figure out what's missing in them. So, I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but you can kind of see that there are quite a few parts that work together to make a complete argument. There's the claim, there's the evidence, he calls it the data or the grounds. There's the warrant, the qualifier, the rebuttal, and the backing. So that's all explained right here. And then you can see in this graphic organizer how it all sort of works together. But here's an example. The claim could be, for example, I should get to go out with my friends on most weekends like this one. Evidence, all my homework is done. But here's the problem. We've been doing really well with coming up with evidence that matches our claims, but how do we know that this evidence makes our claim true? How does homework being done have anything to do with your social life this weekend? So we need to make that connection ourselves. And that's where the warrant or the reasoning comes in. Maybe you say every child deserves a reward for their learning to reinforce their good work and responsibility. So Mom and Dad, here's a counterclaim. You may argue that the specific reward of time with friends is not the only possible reward I might be given, but I would remind you that this is the most authentic, motivating reward for me because it's the reward I had in mind when I took the initiative to complete all of my homework in the first place. Backing. Because I did my homework, I deserve the reward of being with my friends this weekend. So you can see that all of these blue, purple, pink parts work together to explain how the green makes the red true. And then Toulmin talks about something called a qualifier, which we can get into later, but in this case, the qualifier is the word most. That probably seemed really overwhelming because there's a lot of parts. What does this mean for you in English 9? Well, first, you should know that arguments have parts. Convincing arguments are structured in some way. Is the Toulmin model the only way? No, but it's one good way, so it's the way we're going to learn and use right now. When building a compelling argument, you need to include some basic parts. The three basic components of the Toulmin model are the claim, the evidence, and the reasoning. Toulmin calls the reasoning a warrant. Toulmin calls the evidence sometimes the backing, or I guess not backing, but Toulmin calls the evidence, the grounds or the data. So just those three parts are the parts that you right now need to care about. We're really good at claim and evidence. We need to get better at reasoning. Can you develop a convincing argument without all of the other parts of the Toulmin model? Yes, you can. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to start with Toulmin 1.0 basic. Will your arguments be stronger if you use the other elements of the Toulmin model in addition to the basic elements? Probably. So if you want to challenge yourself and try to come up with counterclaims and rebuttals and qualifiers, do it. Why not? But if you're struggling to do that, start with the basic. So when are we engaged in an argument? Obviously, when we're debating, and there will be formal debating in quarter 3. When we're trying to convince someone to think or believe or do something that we want. Think the way we think, believe something we want them to believe. And that can even be we want them to believe that we're credible, that we're a reliable source of information. So we're using claim, evidence, reasoning to make them believe us, to make them believe that what we're saying is right. When we're writing an argumentative essay or speech, and when we're answering questions. When you're answering a question, you're trying to convince me that your logic is correct. How can the Toulmin model help us form complete answers to questions? Remember this one? What effect did Mr. P's talk with Junior have? Provide 2 text-based details to support your answer. Additionally, provide reasoning that explains how your text-based details support your answer. This question needs 4 things to be answered completely. Your answer should attempt to persuade your readers, that would be me in most cases, that your interpretation is logical. So here is an example answer to the question, what effect did Mr. P's discussion have on Junior? Mr. P's talk with Junior made Junior decide to leave the reservation and attend the nearby white school, Reardon, in order to find a way to make his future better. We know that's the answer. Here's some evidence. Junior saying, I want to go to Reardon, and then I want to go tomorrow, right now. So those 2 pieces of evidence show that he wants to go to Reardon, but it doesn't show how these 2 pieces of evidence make your claim true. So that is your job with reasoning, to explain how these specific lines from the book make your claim true. How do the green lines make the red line true? So here's an idea of some reasoning you could offer. When Junior explains to his parents that he wants to go to Reardon and begin the very next day, he is implying that leaving the reservation is the only way he can escape the cycle of poverty that he and his fellow Indians are suffering from generation to generation. When Junior notes that Reardon High School is located in a rich white farm town, he is implying that the way to become prosperous in his future is to get educated alongside people who are already prospering so that he can benefit from the opportunities they can afford to provide their students. Notice that I'm not using a counterclaim, rebuttal, qualifier, those things. I'm just using the Toulmin model basic. So you're right. If you're thinking that reasoning is the hardest part of coming up with a complete argument, you're totally right. It is the hardest part. Here are some helpful tips. Your reasoning should explicitly mention the evidence you chose. For example, in my reasoning, I used phrases like when Junior explains and when Junior notes that to directly reference the evidence I've provided. Your reasoning is interpretive. I explained what the evidence implied using the word implying. You are explaining what is implied, and you are interpreting what the green evidence implies and how it implies the red claim. I connected the implied meaning of the evidence to my answer. I am not merely repeating the claim. I am explaining how the evidence makes the claim true or plausible, and that's the difference between making a claim and explaining how the evidence makes the claim true in your reasoning. So let's try it together one more time. Here's a new question. What was the author's purpose for interrupting the story to explain the unofficial and unwritten Spokane Indian rules of fisticuffs on page 61? Provide 2 text-based details to support your answer. Additionally, provide reasoning that explains how your text-based details support your answer. Remember, this kind of question needs 4 things to be answered completely. Your answer should attempt to persuade your reader, that in this case it's me, that your interpretation is logical. Using the basic Toulmin model to form complete answers to questions might look like this. So there's the question about the unofficial, unwritten Spokane Indian rules of fisticuffs and the author's purpose for stopping the story to explain these. Here is an answer that might work. Alexi, who is the author, don't confuse Alexi with Junior. Alexi wanted to help the reader understand the cultural differences between the reservation and the rest of America that made Junior an outsider when he was off his reservation. Some compelling evidence might include these white boys had ignored the rules. In fact, they followed a whole other set of mysterious rules where people apparently did not get into fistfights on page 65, and I felt like somebody had shoved me into a rocket ship and blasted me to a new planet, page 66. So the question is, how do these specific lines from the book make the claim true? How do the green lines make the red line true? Here is some possible reasoning. When Junior noted that the white boys followed different rules and he felt like he had been blasted to a new planet, he implied that he was foreign to the students at his new school and insinuated that he may not be accepted by this new group because he did not understand their ways and they did not understand his. This is an important point for the author to make because readers could mistakenly believe that Native Americans and non-natives have the same culture based on their coexistence in the same country, the United States. because people who live in the same nation typically share a culture. So you can see that what I've written in blue explains how the green makes the red true. And that's what I'm looking for you to do. You can maybe note that phrases like when Junior noted, implied, insinuated, this is important because, and because, those are all interpretive and words like implied and insinuated that are expressly linked to the evidence, where I say when Junior noted and you see some of the quotes show up in the reasoning. And when I use words like because, I am explaining the relationship between these pieces of evidence and this claim. So finally, what do we mean when we call something an argument? Remember, an argument does not necessarily mean you're in a confrontation. All it means is you're trying to work out a logic problem whereby you explain the logic of your interpretation. That can happen in a confrontation, but it doesn't have to. While arguments can be heated and oppositional, the definition also includes a reason or set of reasons given to support an idea, action, or theory. So really, argumentation is reasoning. And finally, what you want to do is defend your ideas with developed reasoning. So thanks for listening. I hope this clears up some of your questions about argumentation, and I hope it gives you a pretty good understanding of the three basic elements of the Toulmin model that you need to use throughout the rest of this quarter.